A few years ago, a friend took over running an old local pub, and as such, always offered us a roof over our head whenever we were in town. This pub was originally a 17th century coach stop, and so has a bit of history to it. Myself and my wife had been out most of the night, and had one or too many. We decided to crash out for the night, and left the group we were with downstairs in the bar. I sunk straight out to sleep, but the next thing I knew was that there was a very loud banging coming from the radiator. I'm not just talking about a banging, I mean a banging. Unfortunately, this upset my wife, who decided to cling to my back, and so brought me to, but not in a good mood, as I'm sure you can imagine. "What's that noise?" she said. "Just an old central heating system. Go back to sleep," replied I. A bit unconvinced, she settled down to sleep. Just then, the duvet flew away from the bed, or nearly. I caught the corner of it. Still being 99% drunk, shouted "piss off," wrapped the duvet around me, and crashed out again. The next morning, we talked about what had happened, and realized that no one could have pulled the covers away. After speaking to my friend, he told us that no one goes into that room, but he had put us in there to see if anything had happened. After having several staff walk out after various experiences, not too pleased, I went home, and still dwell on what could have happened if I hadn't had a few too many beers. As an aside, lately, the brewery has been refurbished, the pub, into an Irish-themed bar, totally destroying the character and feeling of the bar, and as far as I know, nothing has happened since. Sorry to have prated on a bit, but it is a genuine story, and I think worthy of contributing. Thanks for reading. The following story is not my own but my fiance's. I think I was around 13 when it started. Much of that time is very confused because I was in the classic situation for a poltergeist, an adolescent girl under great stress. I found over the years that when you say, "my mother was crazy," people don't envision quite the right things. However, when you say she didn't always know who I was when I came home from school and once called the police because the girl she didn't know wouldn't leave, they get a little more accurate idea that I'm not using the word crazy loosely. I can now recall exactly what happened now. But the usual things were stuff moving around, my bed shaking, and my clothes, only mine, getting knotted up in the hamper. Virtually everything that happened was confined to my room, except that the hamper was in the bathroom, and my sister later told me things sometimes moved from her desk, which was the other side of the wall. If film stayed in my room overnight, the pictures fogged. No interesting patterns, just murk. I woke up once to a lot of crunching and tearing. The next day, an entire magazine at each page pulled out and the pages wadded into little balls. Sometimes there would be a mumbling voice, no words that I could hear but definitely in the room with me. A couple times, the covers were jerked off of me. These sorts of things happened a couple times a week for several years. At first, I was completely terrified. I can remember lying in my bed as it bounced so hard I was nearly, but not quite thrown out, and sweating and crying. After a while, I began to feel that my fear was somehow feeding things, that the worse I felt, the more active and wild the poltergeist was. I started trying hard to control my fear. I was very into number theory in those days, and found that if I could call up a proof and start running through it, the activity would slow or even stop. If I was too scared to concentrate on that, even multiplication tables helped. A true number freak never forgets. After a year or so, things slowed down to a couple times a month, but continued happening fairly regularly. I think I was 16 when it ended. I woke up one night and my books were coming off of a high shelf and dropping to the floor, one by one. I'd never messed with my books before. I was furious. I said, "You leave me alone." I think I also told her to get out and leave me alone, but my memory is hazier about that. Anyway, there was a very odd feeling, like a whoosh directed towards the window, yet not a sound at all. And then the room was quiet. It felt empty. I went back to sleep. And that was it. No more waking up to find everything in my room moved around. No more being shaken awake in the middle of the night. No more clothes knotted up in the hamper. And film kept in my room came out as perfectly decent or terrible snapshots. Well, not quite completely it. Maybe a half dozen more times in the 30 years since. Things have happened which I ascribe to the poltergeist. I still don't tell the story very often. out of a feeling that thinking about it might call it, whatever it is, back. I think I said some of this here a couple weeks back, though not in as much detail. Sure hope nothing moves in my room tonight. It is very startling to me that Eileen's poltergeist or whatever went away under such similar circumstances. I've also heard more classic stories in which a very firm but polite request to leave stopped a haunting. Thanks for reading. The following story is true. There were two of us who actually witnessed the first of 4 events that occurred within a 2-year period. Needless to say, we were both astounded. My friend's name is Roman, and this is what happened. I'm a computer lab teacher and had at the time of the incident an assistant named Roman. At about 10 a.m. in the morning, we had 2 off periods and were catching up on reports and just chatting. We were both side by side each other working on a computer. Having worked in agricultural research during my college years, I was a little knowledge in plant life, tree trimming, research, and all of that. While we were working, the topic of graphiting citrus trees came up. I don't recall why exactly, but Roman was curious about the subject and questioned me to the point where I even decided to draw a picture of the procedure for him. Now, mind you, I never have or never will claim that my classroom was haunted, but what happened next still baffles me to this day. As I explained the procedure, Roman abandoned our work temporarily and concentrated on the drawing before us. Just in front of my drawing was an empty soda can which I had drunk earlier. Without warning, the can lifted gently off the table in a smooth, slow, steady rise until it reached a little above eye level. The can froze for about 2 seconds and just dropped with a clang as it hit the table. The funny part was that I kept talking and explaining as this happened in front of us. I started stuttering when it finally hit me that something unusual had just happened to us. As if on cue, we both cried, "Did you see that?" Roman was under the impression that I had pulled some kind of stunt. We spent the rest of the morning trying to figure out what had caused the can to float, but nothing. It was aluminum and would not have responded to magnetic stimulus. We told our story in an excited manner to some of our fellow workers. Bad idea. Boy, did we get a load of one-liners. Hey, who you gonna call? Abbott and Costello to meet the Flying Coke can? We even got branded the Flying Burrito Brothers. I think it's in reference to some band or something. This story was not scary, just very unexplainable, and yes, it did happen. On a different date, as we were sitting on a desk working on the kids' computer points, we heard a rapping sound. I immediately followed the sound to the corner of the room and saw it. At the corner of the room is a flag holder, and since I didn't have a flag for it, I used it to hold this 3-foot rod with a hook at the end. I used it to adjust the air vents. Anyway, this rod somehow was pulled back, almost horizontally, and then just dropped. It continued to bounce until it just stopped. The last incident of mine occurred while I was in my classroom with the kids, working on computers with headphones on. Just then, there came a type of growl from the corner of the room. My assistant just froze and stared at me, and I back at him. Not one of my students heard. We sort of just whispered to each other, "Did you hear that?" And they answered, "No. Did you?" There was even a second incident that occurred that was slightly different than the first incident with the growl. In this instant, the growl sort of panned from one side of the room down the length and around to the back of the room. This time, practically all of my students heard the growl. I'll never forget these moments, and I apologize if this sounds kind of jumbly and I don't even know what I'm saying, but I promise, this all happened, and it's all really freaky to me. Thank you for reading. When I was around 6 years old, my mother and I moved into this house right off of Marion Drive, Portland, Oregon. The house was the biggest, most beautiful house I had ever seen. Please take into consideration that I was only 6 at the time. It was a 2-story, white 2-bedroom, 1-bath home. It had a spiral staircase that went up to the 2 rooms upstairs and had overlooked the living area. I don't quite recall when it all started, and my mother does not remember either, but we do remember all the things that took place in the year that we stayed there. Now, everything that I'm telling you, I don't have in any order, except for the final occurrence. One night, my mom and I were in the living room watching TV when we heard this very loud scratching on the side of the house, very persistent and very annoying. but we ignored it, and my mom dismissed it as a tree branch. The very next day, I recall my mom mowing the lawn and stopping. She turned and looked at me and said, "There's no tree here." Another instance was even more alarming. When we moved into the house, there was a window that we had tried to open but couldn't, and mind you, we tried everything in the end, though we knew that there was no way it could have been opened. It had been painted and nailed shut. So I was watching TV one night, and my mom was somewhere, and we heard a loud kind of pounding and a whoosh. We looked around until we had discovered that somehow that the window was open. I had awful dreams there too, so much so that I only stayed in my room one night and the rest I stayed with my mom. Our dog Rebel would never come home. He would always stay at the neighbors, and even we tried to lock him in while we were gone. He would always be outside when we returned. The worst thing that ever happened that I can remember, and this is what finally convinced my mom to move, is when she sent me to her room to get undergarments. She had broke her arm, and the way she had her drawer set up was it had a large mirror on top with all her makeup and coffee and junk sitting there too. I opened her top drawer and closed it just like I always had, and the next thing I know, my mom screams and pushes me onto the bed as the mirror jumps out almost if it were trying to get to me. When we got up to look at the mess, we noticed that nothing had moved out of place on top of the dresser. Not her coffee or makeup or anything had budged. We moved soon after. Unfortunately, it didn't end there. I moved in with my dad about 4 years later to another house in Portland. I was around 10 at the time. This never did anything right out to hurt me. It just made me dream scary things and hear voices. I still dream about the darn house, and it still scares me. Now I live in a house that has a spirit. I'm not sure though. The only real things that happen is lights going on and off, pictures falling off the wall, and funny thing is, you can't keep a pair of slippers in that house for anything. We have went through about 10 pairs, and they just keep disappearing. Figure that one out. It always helps me to talk about this, and I hope that it will help others to know that they are not the only ones. I swore I was. Thanks for reading. My parents and partner were taking a vacation in Tasmania, which I later found out is renowned for its ghost stories, and decided to stay in a little old cottage that had been converted into a B&B, bed and breakfast. At first glance, the cottage looked perfect. 2 bedrooms, kitchen, living area, lounge, and bathroom with jacuzzi. A home away from home. We settled in, and I took a tour of the cottage. It all seemed okay, until I walked into the children's bedroom, which had 2 single beds and a walkthrough to an extension. I felt uncomfortable walking into the room, but dismissed my feelings as being silly. When I walked into the extension, what would have been a perfect little play area for children, I remember thinking what a good idea, but what I felt was overwhelmingly creepy. My hair stood on end, and I had to get out of there. I wanted to have a jacuzzi and relax before dinner. However, the most uninviting brown muddy water came out of the taps. I thought, it appears this jacuzzi doesn't get much use. I'll let it run for a while till the pipes clear. The pipes didn't clear. In fact, they got worse. By that stage, there were leaves and dead insects coming out. It was disgusting. I got the clear sense that I was not welcome there, so I turned the taps off and decided not to have a jacuzzi. That night, we all went out for dinner before returning to our cold stone cottage. We decided to go straight to bed and warm ourselves under the covers. My partner and I stayed in the children's bedroom. I took the single bed furthest away from the eerie extension. I remember climbing into the crisp, cool sheets and curling into a ball before falling asleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up feeling hot. Boiling hot. I was sweating, my skin was burning, and I was overcome with the overbearing intense heat. I was delirious and tried to locate the source of the heat. It was like touching an oven door with ineffective gloves on. Why is the bed so hot, I thought, and turned on the bedside lamp to investigate. Under the bed, there was a cord leading to the control switch for an electric blanket. It was on 3, the highest setting. That's weird. Who turned the electric blanket on? I asked myself. I became terrified and woke up my partner. Did you turn on my electric blanket? I asked him. No, I didn't even know these beds had electric blankets, he replied. Neither did I whispered. Something's turned on. I'm scared. Can I sleep with you? He nodded. We shared a single bed, and I was able to fall asleep again. In the morning, I asked my mother or father if they played a practical joke by turning on my electric blanket in the middle of the night. They said no. We immediately packed our bags and left the cottage. I had informed the owner about the dirty water and the jacuzzi incident. He suggested that I was lying by saying that it was impossible for the jacuzzi to have bad water. He explained that the bathroom was a recent development, only 18 months old, and had been installed with new pipes. He also said that the water source was the same throughout the cottage, and that if dirty water came out of the tap, it would come out of all, which was not the case. Needless to say, that cottage is no longer operating as a B&B. Thanks for reading. I'm a teaching assistant at Western Illinois University and have had some interesting run-ins with our departmental ghost. I spent many late nights working on the top floor of Simpkins Hall and have experienced some interesting things. Doors that will stay open without any problems all day long will shut within 5 minutes after being open late at night. Windows that I've personally closed and secured have suddenly flown open, letting cold air fill the room before I can rush and reshut them. However, the strangest thing to ever even happen occurred very early this morning. After spending much of the night grading papers in the silent offices of the grad, I finally laid on the couch to get a couple of hours of sleep before I had to get up and teach. The entire night had been completely quiet, but as soon as I turned off the lights in the offices and positioned myself for sleep, the sound of an electric typewriter being slowly manipulated, as if by a Hunt and a Peck typist, broke the night's silence. I knew I was alone, and had been since midnight, and so I stood up to investigate. I had no sooner risen when the noise stopped. I stood by the couch within the returned silence for about a minute before lying back down. As I covered myself in my jacket for a blanket, the noise started once again. This time I remained horizontal on the couch and listened to the typing noise until I was sure that it was not the heating system and was indeed coming from the middle of the room and one of the other graduate students' office. Once again I arose, but this time I went to the circuit box and turned on the lights to investigate whether or not our prankster graduate assistant Dan Bender was fooling around. I went to the office from which the typing noise had originated, but there was no one there. After being satisfied that Dan was nowhere in the room, I turned off the lights and went back to the couch. Again, as soon as I had turned off the lights and settled down to sleep, the noise started. This time, I just called out, "Harold, knock it off. I need to get some sleep." Oddly enough, the sound stopped, and I was finally able to go to sleep. I have no idea why I called out the name Harold, but it was the first name that came to mind. Whatever the name of the Simpkin Hall ghost is, he quieted down when I told him to. Others have expressed fear about being alone in the building late at night, but if our building has a spectator, he is harmless despite his poltergeist pranks. Thanks for reading. This is a tale that happened to my friend Joe. There's a playhouse in our area that was once an old barn, but was made into a playhouse by a group of amateur actors. I've heard many stories about being haunted, and once when I was there, I had the chilly feeling that I was being watched and thought I saw a man in one of the windows watching me. That is not the story I'm going to relate. One night, my friend Joe and one of his friends went up there late at night. They wanted to see some of the stuff that was inside, so they broke into the playhouse through a door in the back. I won't go into the legality of this action or the extent of my friend's morals, but I digress. While they were rummaging around through the stuff in the basement, they would not steal from the place, but breaking and entering was okay. Go figure. When they heard the sound of something being dragged across the floor upstairs, they were curious about the sound, so they went upstairs to investigate. When they got upstairs, they saw a trunk had been moved across the floor. They could tell because of a trail it made in the dust around it. They moved it back to make it look like it wasn't moved, so no one would suspect their break-in. They went back downstairs to look around some more, and once again heard the sound of something being dragged across the floor upstairs. They went back upstairs and found the trunk had once again been moved. There were no footprints around it except the ones they made earlier. They moved it back once again and headed downstairs. As soon as they got downstairs, they heard the trunk moving again. This was the last straw, and they decided it was time to beat a hasty retreat. If anyone knows anything about the playhouse, it is called Crescent Lake Playhouse, or has any similar experiences, please post them. Thank you for reading. One night, I awoke to find a small childlike figure in bed with me. He was about 2 feet tall and had the features of a small child, but its head was swollen well beyond a normal size. It was wearing a blue gown with the hands not visible at the end of the sleeves. It was moving its mouth and talking in gibberish. The figure was as real as I was, and it was surrounded by a kind of glowing haze. I ran to my parents' bedroom and woke my dad, but of course, he told me to go back to sleep. So I returned to my room, and now the figure was standing on my bed. I grabbed a pillow and covered my face, and jumped on the bed. It was gone. That started something that would last the next 26 years. I'll condense the years up until 1990. Those appearances, while still frightening, never really made me feel threatened. During this period, which included teenage years, I saw the figure with the same frequency. My bedroom is located at the end of the hallway, with 2 other bedrooms before mine. At the end of the hallway is a landing that blocks the view to the steps. From my bed, I could look out my window and down the hall to the landing and the top of the steps. I always knew right before the figure would appear, because the hair on the back of my neck would stand up and I would get uncontrollable chills. The figure would then appear either on top of the landing or come around the base of the landing and start down the hall towards my room. It never seemed to pay any attention to the other rooms at all. I would normally panic and either shut my door or run into my parents' room and sleep on the floor. Imagine finding your 18-year-old son curled up on your bedroom floor when you wake up in the morning. My parents and sister didn't really believe that I was seeing this apparition. I also would stay up late, being the night person that I am, and watch TV. In my living room, we have the stairs that led up to the second floor. It has a wooden railing on it that goes the length of the last 4 steps. I would often see the figure on the steps watching me from the 3rd or 4th step and then disappear. The only real changes during this time period were that the figure was losing its color and becoming more transparent. Now things would change drastically. A neighbor, with some knowledge of this sort of activity, told me to confront the figure and tell it to leave and never come back. I was to tell it that I was its power source and I was shutting off the power. I did this and enjoyed about a year of no sightings. Around this time, I told the story to my girlfriend of the time. She thought that its description sounded like a baby with water on the brain and still wearing its gown from the hospital. She thought that it was a lost soul trying to contact me to help it with some task so that I could finally rest in peace. I started to look into the house's history and my family's. The house sits on land that was farmland and a dirt road only 150 years ago. The land was owned by one man, and he had his farm and homestead around the area of my house. The main house of the estate is 1 block from my house and is still standing. My house is 40 years old, and we are the second family to live in it. The couple before us had no children that we know about. I have a sister 3 years younger than me and no other siblings. I've asked my parents if they had a child that died that I was unaware of, but they didn't. So after all of my checking, I found that nothing could explain the apparition. After about a week of thinking about the interpretation my girlfriend had given, guilt of banishing the figure overcame me. I asked it to come back one night, and I told it I would help it. The very next night the sighting started again, but with much greater intensity. I can now say, never do what I did. Once it's gone, let it stay gone. The sightings would happen more frequently, and sometimes they would terrify me. The figure looked the same, but something was very different. I was sure what it was, but now, there was another force in addition to the familiar figure. I began to see small black colored creatures which I can only describe as imps. They were solid black, 1 to 2 feet tall, and ran around on all 4s. They appeared mostly in the living room and coming from the hall closet. Now to explain the rest of the house setup that pertains to the story. The man that lived here before us started to dig a basement, but he never completed it. All that remains is a 3 to 4 foot crawl space accessible from outside the house. The hall closet was to be the stairs down to the basement. He had started making the stairs going down, but he boarded it all up when he stopped digging the basement. The stairs going up to the second floor are directly over the would-be basement step in the hall closet, so there are 2 ways from inside the house to access the crawl space, if you really wanted to. Rip up the 3rd or 4th step of the stairs or knock out the back of the closet. I began to make the connection between where the figures appeared and where the access ways were. The sightings got more intense, and sometimes they even drove me from my house. Normally, my dog would sense a small figure and act funny when it was around. But now, when the imps appeared, my dog would be in a very deep sleep, and I could never wake him up. I would either leave the house and stay over at a friend's. Sometimes, I would be knocking on her door at 2 a.m. terrified. Other times, if I was able to get between them and the steps, I would make a run for it to my room or my parents' room, because even these creatures would not venture in the bedrooms. My mother was noticing my moods, and I had told her about the new happenings, so she told me to get her the next time I saw the figure or imps. The next time I saw the figure upstairs coming down the hall, I ran into her room and woke her up. I led her into the hall where the figure still was. I pointed to it, and it began to back away and go down the steps. I chased it down the third step where it vanished. While she could not see it, she could tell by my eye movements that I was watching something moving across the hall and steps. I think that's when my family started to believe a little. I became so used to these new additions because they never did any harm, but they did make me feel very uneasy. The figure was becoming even more transparent. Certain lamps in the house would go on and off by themselves, often with other witnesses around. I would hear the TV go on in the middle of the night when I knew no one was downstairs. I'd theorized that the figure needed help to appear because it was slowly fading away. I assumed the imps were helping him, but the figure was still fading. I was waiting for a new addition to the cast, so the figure could still appear, since I still hadn't figured out what it wanted me to do. The sighting stopped again for a few months. I spoke with a parapsychologist, but then decided to leave well enough alone. I didn't want things getting worse. I decided to go into the crawl space and check out the area under the stairs. I took my dog down there with me, and I crawled into the area. There had not been anyone under there for years before this. I found an old maid playing card with not a bit of dust on it right under the third step. We have wall-to-wall carpeting, so this did not fall through the joints. I hadn't seen that deck of cards for over 20 years, but here was one. It had one corner that looked like it had been dipped in acid, but the rest was in good shape. I took it and put it in a pocket Bible and put it in my car. The sighting started again, only very small. I would call my girlfriend on the cordless phone and tell her it's happening again, and then walk upstairs while still on the phone with her. The next time was the worst of all. The figure appeared very bright, like it did 10 years ago, but it didn't look very happy. The imps appeared again, but they were more bold this time. Then a 7-foot tall man-shaped black figure appeared. It looked like it was either made of smoke or some liquid. It looked semi-solid, and you couldn't see through it. At the same time, the room was filled with imps, and a bearded old man's face took shape on the wall and started mumbling. The face was about 6 foot high and 4 feet wide. The familiar figure looked like it was sorry for doing this to me. I left the house and sat in my car until dawn. I knew I had to confront this new entity and try to drive it away. I also figured that if it wanted me, it was going to get me either way, so I had nothing to lose. My sanity, life, and maybe my soul were on the line, and I honestly believe this was the only way to stop it before it branched out. I was the original power source, so I was going to shut off the power. The next night, I prayed for protection and the strength to drive this evil away. I had a Bible handy as I sat up as usual listening to my CDs. About 2 a.m., I noticed my dog was in one of those deep sleeps, and I began to look around. The figure and the tall black figure appeared along with the rest of the apparitions. I informed them in the calmest voice I could get at the time that I was taking away their power and they had no power over me. I told them I, my family, and my house was protected by God and they could not harm us. I walked right past the tall figure and the imps moved out of the way. I walked right up the steps and never looked back. That was about 2 years ago, and I've not seen them ever since. We placed the Bible on the stairs and a cross in the closet to block off their entrances. I still feel there is a presence there that tries to let me let it in. I still hear bumping and walking around, but the apparitions are gone, banished to the crawl space I assume. They will not get another portal in here, so they will remain there. We did have the house blessed years ago, everywhere except the crawl space. I think that might be the answer to end it for all good. Thanks for reading. After my senior prom, my buddies and I dropped off our old small-town Tennessee dates and headed to another friend's house to unwind. The prom had been tough on all of us. We never chose the right dates, and we were watching MTV on the couch. This was 1983, you know. After severe 2 a.m. boredom set in, one of my friends and I decided to go for a walk on the golf course behind the house and see if anyone else was up at this hour. We walked a short distance, really just from one fairway to the next, and looked with interest at this giant old tree next to the creek at the bottom of the hill. It was a dark, clear night, and my buddy Mike and I could make out something under the tree. I asked Mike what it looked like to him, and he agreed with me that it looked like two people and one of them was digging. I thought it was someone up to no good, and the last thing I wanted to do on prom night was get busted by the cops, so I said we should leave. At this point, Mike and I were about 300 yards away from the shadowy figures. We turned around and took about 2 steps before I looked back again. In that 1 second, the figures had gained about 1/3 of the distance between us and were closing in fast. Mike and I both screamed profanities and hightailed it for the house. I shouted, "Don't look back," because the people in the movies that get killed are the ones who look back, but I forgot to remind him of the little knee-high chain that keeps the golf carts from leaving the cart path. As he sprawled out on the dump grass, I jumped blindly, hoping I would miss the near-invisible chain. I made it and helped him up without looking back, and we made it safely inside. Imagine if you were our third friend. Of course, you would have to go see it for yourself. So after a tall glass of water, we weren't into drinking beer yet. We took Kermit outside. After a short briefing, we went to the top of the hill and let him go down to the scary part. After a few seconds, we heard that same 4-letter word, and here comes Kermit hustling up the hill. I was a little surprised that he was running so fast. He was a lot less chicken than we were, but there was no way anyone was going to beat me back to the house. In retrospect, we should have done some scientific tests or taken some pictures, but we were really tired and creeped out. Mostly tired since we had been dancing all night to Rick Springfield cover tunes. So we went back to Kermit's house and crashed. This story was mostly told as a funny icebreaker at boring parties later on, and we never thought much about it as the years passed. As a closing note, years later, when my folks finally joined that country club and I played golf there, I saw the 2 headstones of the farmer and his wife, who used to own the land a long time ago, that are buried near the 6th tee about 300 yards from where we saw those shadowy figures. My wife works at a residential care facility, and for the last month or so, they've been having trouble with the ghost of a lady who died there about 5 years ago. She was a very unhappy woman who didn't like anyone that worked in the complex. The only thing she seemed to enjoy was her pills. After her death, there was no sign of a ghost until they expanded the complex. Now they have problems every night. Almost all of the employees have seen her around the medication room. They say she is very small, about 5 feet tall, very solid looking, with no hands or face. They've also seen her walk through a solid oak door. Some nights they say she just goes back and forth between the new section and the original building. What is most alarming though is that lately she's becoming violent. Most of the experiences are mild, pinching, pushing, and such. However, it has taken a serious turn. One of the girls on Wednesday, January 17th, 1996, had a very large fire extinguisher thrown at her and was held captive in the elevator going up and down between floors for several minutes. On the following Thursday, one day, the girls reported that a large commercial refrigerator was rocking back and forth, like someone was trying to turn it over. The owner of the facility has also seen her and is planning on bringing in a psychic to tell her to move on. Thanks for reading. We own this farmhouse. It's haunted by a ghost named Catherine. The reason we know that the ghost name is Catherine is because one day, this lady stopped by and asked if she could see the house. We wanted to know why she wanted to see the house, and she told us that her father and grandfather built the house in 1900. Her grandmother, Catherine, loved the house. Catherine and her husband had to move. She didn't want to move because she loved her house and, while she was away, she died. I guess her spirit came back to the house. Let me tell you why I believe this. When we first bought the house, my Uncle Pat was living there. He would sleep in the living room of the house, and during the night, he would hear doors shut, and no one else was in the house. Plus, this happened more than one time. Then we rented the house to some people. We never told them about the door shutting. These people that were renting the house asked if the house was haunted because they could hear someone walk across the attic floor, slam a door, walk back across the floor, and slam another door. There are no doors up in the attic. When the renters moved out, my grandma and grandpa moved into the house. They said that they didn't hear anything. My Uncle Pat would sometimes come and visit them and stay in the guest bedroom, which we believe was Catherine's bedroom. All night long, we would hear something tapping on the window. There's nothing close to even touch the window. Also, Catherine has stared at my Uncle Pat, even called his name. One thing that freaks me out is that on New Year's Day, I had a dream, and in this dream, Catherine told me why she kept my Uncle Pat up at night. The day after I told my Uncle Pat this, he heard someone call his name, and everyone else in the house was sound asleep. I know that some of this may be hard to believe, but believe me, it is true, and I wouldn't make up a story like this. You just have to believe me. Thanks for reading. Joan and I live in the small town of Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin. It is located about 90 miles east of the Twin Cities. One evening, Joan drove to Minneapolis to pick up her daughter, who was attending school there. On the return trip, Joan let her daughter drive, and they both conversed about school and other events in their lives. It was approximately 10 at night, and small pockets of fog banks began to develop on the highway. Joan turned from looking at her daughter and yelled at her to slow down and avoid what looked to be a motorcyclist. She recalled seeing a leather jacket and various details of the bike, but she vividly remembers how the headlights reflected off the chrome of the bike, yet it went through at the same time. The motorcyclist was in front of their vehicle for about 5 seconds and then drove off into the ditch. Joan's daughter pulled over to the side of the road, and they both looked at each other and verified what they had both witnessed. Spooked out of their minds, they sped for home. They were traveling on Highway 29, which links I-94 to Green Bay. Currently, HY 29 is being expanded to a 4-lane highway due to the many fatal accidents that have occurred in the past. Thanks for reading. When I was a very young child, my parents rented an old German house. What made renting this house strange is that German families rarely rent out an entire house, especially to American servicemen and their families. The house is in 3 levels: the first floor, second floor, and the attic. The house was full of antique furniture. The service couple before us had moved out when their 6-month-old baby died of crypt death. So here we arrive, my stepfather, my mother, and me, 4 years old. The people that moved in upstairs were, not disrespect intended, very low-class people. The wife's name was Cookie. There were 2 boys, and the father, whose name and face I cannot remember. One day Cookie and my mother, bored in the German countryside and still no furniture to unpack, decided to explore the attic and its treasures. In a very old dresser, my mother found one drawer filled with family photographs going all the way back to the turn of the century. Her and Cookie felt amazed at the certainly important heirlooms left in the house by its owners, the Hummels. In the next drawer, my mother found many crucifixes, in many shapes and sizes. The next day, Cookie and my mother began to make a playground in the barn for us kids to play in. They found a well-like concrete hole in the middle of the barn. Inscribed in the concrete were the words Rommel 1943 and a swastika. What made this strange and even more scary was that in the courtyard was inscribed that the house belonged originally to the Schmidt family. My mother never allowed us to play in that concrete well. Soon after we all moved in, my mother and stepfather began hearing loud noises from upstairs, as if the furniture were being moved around. My mother thought that Cookie and her husband were trying to entertain us. With the noises, the crucifix began appearing all over the house. You would open a drawer, and there it would be. You open a closet door, and one would be hanging there. When my mother and Cookie were going to put them back, all the crucifixes would be moved to a different drawer. My memory and only memory of this time is when Cookie's sons tried to scare me by taking me up in the attic and throwing dead mice on me. I heard them screaming as if someone were beating them. When they ran down the stairs, I just had to see what scared them so. I saw a little girl sitting on one of the ancient cedar chests. She was very thin with little hair and very large brown eyes, giggling. Ever since, she was my imaginary friend. But the winds of change came. Cookie's husband was arrested for molesting me in the attic, an event that I can no longer recall. The accusations were very ugly, and I'm glad that I do not remember. but the German police would not let them be tried by American system and arrested him under German law. Cookie and her sons were moved out that day in a fear-for-life move, for she was the one that turned him in. My parents and myself were being moved 2 days later in fear-for-life move as well. It was those 2 days when my mother knew that Cookie wasn't the one moving the furniture in the attic and wasn't telling ghost stories to amuse us, but telling the truth. It all happened so fast that our furniture had arrived, yes, but we never opened a box. When we finally got to our new home and opened the last moving box, at the very bottom of the box was one of the most beautiful of the crosses, except for the out-of-place death shed. My stepfather took it and threw it away in the field 2 hours of a drive away. What about the Hummels? They were such nice people, my mother said. She didn't want to ask the antiques and family heirlooms. She figured there was a family member that they did not want to mention. What about the crosses? My mother found out that the crosses were strange, but the death shed was the sign of the SS. My mother also found out that there was a fairly unknown concentration camp nearby. Is it possible the house was commanded by an SS officer from a Jewish family? What about the children? Of the 4 children living in the house in the 3 months one died, 1 was raped, and 2 were subject to the harsh discipline of a father that seemed to change in that house. What about the giggling girl? She stayed with me, I remember, until I received a fractured skull from a wild horse. On the way to the hospital, I remember she said she had to leave me. I cried more from her saying goodbye than I did the 240 stitches I received, but if the horse had kicked me an inch lower, it would have broken my neck. An inch higher, I would have been blind for life. Was she my good luck charm? Was she a daughter in the Schmidt family long dead? Who knows? Thanks for reading. When I was 15, my friend Terry, who was a couple years older than me, spent the night. There's no way either of our parents would allow us to have our own Ouija board in our possession, so we decided to make our own with poster boards and scissors. I myself really didn't believe in the Ouija and what many claimed it could do. I just always assumed that someone was always pushing it to say whatever they wanted it to say. Terry really wanted to do this, so I decided to go along with it, figuring she was just going to try and scare me or something. We talked with the spirit that just so happened to call herself Terry also. You can guess. I didn't believe this thing was really moving on its own. I had my mind set that she was moving it the whole time. Well, we started to argue over it, when all of a sudden, the planchette started to spin around really fast. Still assuming it was Terry, I got mad. Then it just suddenly stopped. That was it. Terry started telling me that you were supposed to make it say goodbye or it stays here. Still mad. I said, yeah, right, whatever. We started talking about other stuff, and in the washroom, which is on the other side of the kitchen, we started hearing a lot of noise. Now there were 3 doors to that room. One went outside, one connected to the kitchen, and other connected to my sister's room. My sister was an RN and was working the night shift, so no one was in her room. We knew that no one could have gone through the kitchen, because they would have gone right past us and we would have seen them. The outside door was locked and bolted from the inside, so that excluded anyone coming in from outside. Both of us just stood there as the sound got louder and louder. My dad had a bunch of empty boxes stacked up in the front of the outside door. To me, it sounded like 2 people were throwing these boxes back and forth all over the room. Of course, we were scared, but I didn't associate it with anything having to do with a ghost, etc. I was thinking that someone had gotten in from outside, somehow. I don't know why, but I grabbed up a butcher knife and told Terry to go and get Brian, my brother. He and my parents were asleep. All this time, you could still hear these boxes being tossed around everywhere. Terry and Brian came up to me at the door, and you could tell by the look on Brian's face, he was hearing the commotion too. He took the knife from me and jerked the door open. Everything at that moment went dead silent. The boxes had been moved because they were laying everywhere, but no signs of anyone in the room. Needless to say, we were all pretty freaked out. I didn't dare tell him what we'd been up to earlier playing with the Ouija board. To this day, I can find any explanation as to why we heard what we did or how the boxes got moved. Thanks for reading. When I was a teenager, around the age of 16, I found a Ouija board at a yard sale and bought it for 25 cents. Skeptical of the Ouija, I devised the experiment deemed to test if it was simply a matter of self-suggestion. I was going to ask what pet would die next and think to myself fish. We had several adult cats, dogs, and guinea pigs who were not elderly and very good health, but I had a tank of tropical fish, several of which were getting on in fish years. I was trying to trick the board by seeing if it would give me the answer I was thinking, which would be a logical conclusion. I tried the Ouija board with my mother, a skeptic of all things supernatural. After setting it up, I asked my question. We put her fingertips on the planchette and waited. After 5 seconds of no response, Mom tired of wasting her time and decided that she was going to bed and left the room. I put the board away and didn't think about it for a few days. Later that same week, I was talking to a male friend of mine on the phone. I was telling him of my disbelief in attempted experimentation with the board. I just told him the question I was going to ask it: what pet would be the next to die? I took a breath and told him, and the answer I was looking for was, when all of a sudden, the books on the shelf behind me tipped over. They knocked into a figurine and sent it to the floor, where it shattered. The figurine was of a ceramic fish. These books had never tipped over before and were securely in place. I've not seen them fall in such manner since this time period, almost 13 years later. The timing of the fall was too eerie. It was exactly at the point where I would have said fish. My friend said that he heard the noise and that I sounded stunned. Though it was a long-distance call, I ended it hastily, went and got the Ouija board out of my closet and put it in the garage. I would not touch it again. My mother had to get rid of it without my knowledge, as I so feared it. I think that was a warning sign for me. I've taken Ouija boards seriously since then. If they do not channel the dead, then they certainly set up a psychological premise which I don't think should be tampered with. I feel like it is opening up the door to a stranger, either an earthbound or entity. I don't know, but thanks for reading. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, we moved into a house which had a scary history, as it turns out. My mom and dad took my youngest brother to dinner. Linda, my sister, and I didn't want to go. We were instructed to bring the boxes of books in the garage upstairs to the library. While we were doing this, we found an old Ouija board and started playing with it. I thought for sure it was my sister pushing it, as it told me I was going to be hit by a car and die by the time I was 10, which obviously 25 years later, I'm still here. It also said that there were 5 spirits in the house, and its name was Jax, boring, and we put it away. That was when we started hearing footsteps in other parts of the house running, lights going on and off, radios blaring that we knew we had turned off, doors slamming, knocking, and rapping in the wood, boxes being moved about in the attic, etc. We lived there for 5 years, and I can tell you that I have nightmares to this day. Now this house was on a road which was formerly known as the Santa Fe Trail. A couple of miles up the road was where the Santa Fe Trail and the Pikes Peak Trail met. There were Indian encampments, settlements, and a bad stagecoach accident and fire all in the general vicinity. I don't know if Linda and I had visited into the house, or it was there to begin with. My family are seers, so I suppose I should get used to it, but I've never been free of hauntings since then. Thanks for reading. I went to a friend's house to stay for the weekend. My friend and I always loved ghost stories, magic, psychics, and anything else mysterious. Those things would just get us going when we were bored. Well, I decided to bring my Ouija board, which we used many times and usually wait until midnight to use it. This particular night, it was midnight, and we were playing with it, just regular, everyday things, when all of a sudden, it said, "Don't be alarmed. In the next few hours, you're going to get a cold chill running through your bodies." We asked it, "What do you mean, don't be alarmed?" Well, the board replied that I and all the people around me will notice something in the next hour. Well, right after I said that, my friend's little brother came into the room with us, and it just started to hit us. This is what it were telling us were going to happen. My friend's brother is terrified of ghosts, so we all decided to just put the board up and wait to see what, if anything, happened. My friend said he had an idea. I got a string out that attaches to a crystal. He said it's kind of like a mini Ouija board, and you can ask it yes and no questions. Well, we said for yes, move it vertically, and for no, move it horizontally. We also requested that the responses cause the crystal to move fast and big, so we can detect when a spirit is present. We hung this crystal on a string from a lamp and waited. It was about a half an hour to an hour later when all of a sudden, we heard a big ting-ting sound coming from the lamp. We flipped on the light, and the crystal was swinging violently. I mean, it was starting to really scare me and my friend. I can only imagine how my friend's little brother would have reacted if he witnessed this. We turned the lights off and got real calm and quiet. The atmosphere in the room seemed to change. It got eerily quiet, and it felt as if something were about to jump out at us at any minute. It also got really hot, really fast. My friend remarked that he thought something big was about to happen. Right when he said that, we heard the door creak open. It wasn't much, but it was like someone was trying to sneak by us. Then suddenly, it got real cold, and I mean so cold that we were shivering and covering up. All of a sudden, you could see a light blue or white colored light getting brighter as it got closer. Then just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. Then it appeared again, only this time, it got real bright and was coming from the middle of the closet. While we were focusing on that, my friend's little brother said, "Look over there," and when we turned to look in that direction, you could see a shadow like someone were walking by. Next thing we knew, the crystal was reacting to it, and it just fell off the lamp. This shadow appeared to wave, as if to tell us, "Yeah, I'm here, but I won't hurt you." The wind blew outside, and right when the wind blew, the shadow was vanished. Thanks for reading. One boring summer night, my neighbor suggested we give the Ouija board a try. Everyone in our apartment complex were fully aware we're haunted, so I agreed. I wanted to get my baby to sleep first. As I rocked my baby to sleep, I asked my neighbor how she came to have this Ouija board, because she had never mentioned it before. She said that the lady on the other side of her was carrying it out to the dump the day before, so she asked her why she was throwing it away, because it seemed to be in good condition. The other neighbor said that she was throwing it away because ever since she had it in her apartment, things were falling off the walls and breaking. My neighbor said, "Well, if you don't mind, I would like to have it." That's how she got it. Now that my daughter was in good deep sleep, I made a pallet for her upstairs in my neighbor's bedroom. I put her on the floor because I didn't want her falling off the bed and getting hurt. I also didn't want her in the same room as we toyed around with the Ouija board. Some more friends came over, so altogether, there were the four of us. The spirit contact said no when we asked him if we were a man. It also said no when we were asked if it were a woman. At this point, I took my hands off the board. One of the other people there told me that was a bad idea because that was the opening of circle we had formed. I immediately put my hands back on the board, but my friend said it was too late, that it was already let out. Right after he said this, we heard a big bang in the room upstairs where my baby was. My baby started to cry. When we went to check, nothing was moved, and my baby seemed to be only startled by the noise. After that, I decided I wanted nothing more to do with the Ouija board. Thanks for reading. Recently, my friend Aaron lost control of his motorcycle and died. Prior to the accident, Aaron, myself, and a few friends, Brutus, Megan, and Alex, decided to play with the Ouija board. We played for a while, when all of a sudden the planchette just froze. We couldn't move it for anything. Next thing we knew, the planchette just started moving on its own. We sat on the floor in amazement, watching this board acting on its own free will. All of a sudden, the planchette turned in Aaron's direction and scooted forward about an inch or so. Right about that moment, Aaron's cell phone rang. He picked up his phone, expecting it would be someone he knew calling him. Only whoever it was, or whatever it were on the other line, hung up. That's when we decided we'd pick up the board. Not long following this incident is when Aaron had his accident. After Aaron's accident, my friend Megan and I decided we'd try and contact him using the Ouija board. We were in the living room with only candles for lighting. We had a picture of Aaron sitting across from us. We asked, "Is Aaron there?" The board replied yes. I then asked, "How are you doing?" The board responded, "Great." Then before we could ask any further questions, the planchette said stop. We asked stopped what? The board said all. We then asked all of what? Then Megan asked, "Do you want us to leave you alone?" The board replied yes. We both looked at each other and Megan said, "He wants to rest in peace." I agreed, and then we said bye. It then said bye, Brett. Megan said, "I love you, Aaron," and the planchette spelled out, "I love you too, Megan." We took our hands off the planchette and it moved on to its own by saying goodbye. Needless to say, we both were pretty teary-eyed after that. Thanks for reading. When I was about 17 or 18, I was at a friend's house. A friend who swears to this day her house is haunted. She claims that her and other family members would hear all kinds of sounds, especially when they were alone or if it were an exceptionally quiet night. Something even tried to get in one of the doors once, but when they looked out the window to see who was there, they found nothing, no one. Anyway, this particular night, my friends and I decided to play with a Ouija board. I've never personally ever used one before, and after this incident, will never participate in using one again. The planchette began moving on its own free will. As if that weren't bad enough, we didn't properly close the session, and I swear something evil followed me home that night. I tried to tell my parents about it, but I don't think they believed me. There were nights when I would hear what sounded like a stick being tapped on the walls, circling the whole parameter of my bedroom. I feel that's where this evil entity dwelt, because the rest of the house was uneventful. I began having terrible dreams. I would wake up and try to get out of my room as fast as I could, always with some sort of interference preventing me. I woke up once and felt as if I couldn't get out of bed. It was pitch dark, blacker than black that night. I threw my blanket off and tried to find my way to the door. It took me about 10 minutes before I finally found the door handle and light switch. It was as if they had just vanished from my room for that period of time. When I finally got a hold of the handle to the door, for some reason, I couldn't get that door to open for anything. I had to pop my window out and crawl out of the room that way. I had left home for a while. I returned to find my bedroom door wide open and just fine. One night, I also heard something fall in the bathroom, next to where I was at. It was very loud. After I finally moved out and in with my boyfriend, who is now my husband, it didn't seem to follow me. It continued to stick to only that room of my parents' home. My brother moved into my bedroom after I left, and he too reported unusual occurrences in that room as well, but he seemed to experience more than I did. He was so disturbed by the things happening in his room that he ended up putting all sorts of crosses, religious practices, and even a wooden statue of Christ he got from our pastor, all over his room for protection. One day, I went into his room and discovered the top of a statue appeared to be burned. That's when he told me about the weird occurrences happening in his room, including the statue appeared to have smoke coming out of it. Another disturbing thing that happened was that the cross had flipped in an upside down position in the middle of the night. He also claimed he felt as if he were being choked at different times. The same sounds I heard when I stayed in this room, he heard as well. Eventually, a family bought the place for my parents. They had 2 young girls, ages 11 and 12. I was talking with a friend of mine, and they told me that the new owners swear one of the rooms is haunted. I can only guess what room they were referring to. I have no doubt that whatever we did that night with the Ouija board, whatever was moving that planchette came home with me, and to this day, still dwells in that one room of our old home. 2 summers ago, I started working at a camp, a haunted camp. No one has ever shared these stories outside of the camp, and fear might scare campers away. During staff week, I heard talk of ghosts and spirits at the camp, but being a skeptic, I just blew them off. The more I listened, the more real it became. Senior staff members, even the camp director, told stories that chilled me to the bone. On the 4th night of staff week, I was invited to use the Ouija board in the chapel. I'd used one as a child, but assumed it was always just people moving it around. This time was different. You can tell if the Ouija pointer planchette is working, because it floats. If someone is moving it, the pointer will scrape, but it was floating and making no noise. When we asked who it was, it gave 3 initials. We asked what it did before it died, and it said logging. We took this as logging. The camp used to be used for logging, and a lumberjack was not likely to know how to spell correctly. We asked a few more uninteresting questions that I cannot recall, because I was preoccupied with the rustling I heard nearby. It was the unmistakable sound of footsteps. After about 3 minutes of hearing footsteps that sounded like they were walking around the chapel and gradually getting louder. Oh yeah, the chapel is outside, and it just has a roof and foundation. It is not an enclosed building. We took the message to heed and beat foot out of there. This is my own personal account of a Ouija board experience, but according to another staff member's mother who decided to join me one night, She was shaken back and forth by a spirit and the Ouija board flipped itself over. The last incident of my second summer was in the chapel again. We were playing with the Ouija board again, but this time, we didn't get such a nice spirit. It said nasty things to us, like kill you and die. It said go or die, so we decided to take the first option and we left. As we were walking away, I looked back and saw a face in the window of the small room connected to the chapel. It was glowing silver. I was about 50 yards away, and I could not make out much except an outline, but my friend saw it too, and it was enough to make us run. Thanks for reading. When I was about 12 years old, I went to my friend's family Halloween party. We were bored, so we went to the garage to see what we could find to do. We found an old Ouija board sitting on the game rack and asked our aunt if we could take it back to my friend's house. She said we could, so we did. When we got there, we went to her room and shut all the lights off, except a little lamp. We were talking to someone, and I didn't believe that it was moving on its own and blamed it on my friend. She asked the board to give us a sign that something was there. About 2 minutes later, her dresser in bed started shaking really hard. It scared us so bad, we put it away. We went to bed an hour later and put the board under her bed neatly. When we woke up, it wasn't there any longer. We haven't seen the board since. When I was 17, I moved into a 2-bedroom unit. Me and my mates made a Ouija board and used it. I feel like it must have opened a gateway for a bad entity. When I moved in the house, it made no noises, but after that, you could feel a bad presence. Wherever this entity would go, the walls and ceiling around it would creak. At night, I would be lying in bed, and I could hear it creaking in the lounge room, and then start to move into my bedroom. I would then feel pressure in my bed, and a feeling as though something was pushing me down on the bed. It would also turn on things like the fan over the stove and the heater, which was gas. You could physically see the dial move. Also, my mood started to change while I was there. It got to the point where I was too scared to sleep there, so I stayed up at my mom's a lot. She got sick of it, so she took her psychic circle there. My mom has been talking to a spirit called Wayne for years. She talked to the spirit, and it said it didn't want to leave, but with the assistance of the spirit named Wayne, he made it leave. When I returned home, I could feel the entity had gone. Hey guys, Phantom of Darkness is here, and you know what I'm doing? I'm working on my pickup lines for flirting. Here go some of them. Did you just see a mistletoe? Because I think my toe got stuck in the mistletoe, and we can just hang out together while my body is flailing in the air. And I heard that Santa Claus is coming to town. I bet you're coming to town too. It's so fun to have you around because this is... Okay. Just kidding, guys. Thank you so much again for tuning into this Phantom extravaganza of a compilation. The only thing that needs to get picked up is this video and shared around to everybody you know, commented, liked, and subscribed. Because all the love that you can give to me is commenting, liking, sharing, and subscribing to this video. Well, not this video specifically, but the whole channel. Anyway, guys, I got some exciting content lined up for you in the future. Of course, this is a compilation, so it's kind of old stuff, but if you're new to the channel, like I said, you're probably going to hear these cringy outros more often, and for that, I have no sympathy for myself, and I can't say anything else other than the fact that that made no sense. But before I end this outro, I just wanted to say something serious for a second. 2 of my most dedicated subscribers are actually going through some cancer treatments right now, and I just wanted to say that it's a horrible affliction, and I'm so sorry for the pain that this has caused you. Melanie McDonald and Pumpkin Joanne, they both have cancer right now, and it's something that I really hope goes away soon, so that they can get back to being themselves and watching my videos as much as possible, and just really getting back to enjoying life and not feeling so much pain. And I'm hoping both of you make a speedy recovery for sure, and I really hope that everybody who's had issues in the past, health-wise, can clear that up as soon as possible, because these serious illnesses are really debilitating, and it's a horrible situation to be in, and I'm so sorry that you guys are experiencing this kind of issue. Anyway, guys, good night, good morning, and I'll see you in the next video. Obviously, I love you guys. Bye-bye.